Over the past few weeks, we've spoken an awful lot about transfer rumours, mainly about players who might be leaving West Ham, players who definitely won't be leaving, and players who are kind of somewhere in the middle. Well, today we've actually got a mixture of all of those stories. One transfer has finally been completed. Another that looked like a player was definitely leaving now seems to be off the table. And one experienced player is quietly rebuilding his reputation right in front of Nuno during pre-season. And then we've got one of the news stories of today, and the biggest talking point, and a concern that our main striker, Taty Castellanos, could soon become the subject of serious interest before this transfer window shuts. Look, let's start with the transfer that we know is done and dusted. And that, of course, is Crysencio Summerville. After all the speculation, whether he was going to go to Roma or Aston Villa or God knows how many other clubs, Summerville has completed his move to Saudi Arabian club Al Hilal. Kind of brings to an end what's been a relatively short spell at West Ham. And this transfer has been expected for some time, but it's not now as official as it can be. I think it's going to be announced anytime soon. The Dutch winger has signed what's understood to be a 4-year deal with Al Hilal, with West Ham receiving a reported £55 million, apparently all of it or most of it up front, plus another £10 million in add-ons as well. Now, look, I'm not going to spend too long analysing this because we've covered Summerville from every possible angle over the last couple of weeks. We've looked at why the club were prepared to sell, how the negotiations developed, why Al Hilal became the favourites, and what the deal means financially for West Ham. The important thing is this deal is now done. So when you combine the £55 million received for Summerville and £85 million received for Matthias Fernandes, West Ham have generated over £140 million just from 2 outgoing transfers this summer. That is extraordinary business for a club that's been relegated to the Championship. You can argue all day whether you think would have rather kept one or both of those players. But I guess, when it comes to reality, we knew that of all the players around, those 2 were the prominent ones that were going to leave. Look, the club had to rebuild its financial position after relegation, and that the 2 sales has given Niels Koppen, Nuno, and Daniel Kretinsky enormous flexibility heading into the rest of this transfer window. The challenge now isn't selling any more players. The challenge is replacing quality with quality and keeping those players that we really need to have in this squad for the upcoming season. I guess that's what supporters will judge us on when this transfer window is over in the next few weeks, who we've got left and who we've brought in. Now, before I wrap it on, if you're new to this channel or if you've subscribed to the West Ham Voice before, if you've watched the West Ham Voice before, but yet to become a subscriber, the QR code has just appeared in the top corner there. If you enjoy the content, why not click on that? Takes you to the subscription page, which is free of charge. Become a subscriber. Right. Let's move on to a player whose future suddenly looks probably a lot less certain than many people expected. And that, of course, is Edson Alvarez. Now, wasn't that long ago, it felt almost inevitable that Alvarez would be leaving West Ham, and reports suggested that FC Cologne were interested, and on the surface, it appeared to make perfect sense. Alvarez, back after injury, played in the World Cup for Mexico, did okay, put himself in the shop window again, and it looked as if Cologne were going to come calling. And the fact that it was Cologne linked is all because of Tim Steiden, who now works at the club as their squad planner. He knows Alvarez well, having been instrumental bringing him to West Ham in the first place. Naturally, people put 2 and 2 together and assumed that the reunion was likely. There were suggestions that a loan move would be explored. But where's that story gone? It seems to have completely cooled down. Now, whether there was any concrete anything behind it in the first place is really difficult to know, or whether it was just ITKs and journalists speculating, who knows. But something links are genuine and some never develop. Other times they're just simply assumptions based on existing relationships between football people around. Look, either way, there hasn't been any real momentum behind the move recently, which leaves us with an interesting question. What if Alvarez actually stays at West Ham? I think opinions amongst West Ham fans will probably be split. On one side, you'll have fans who feel his time at the club should be over and he simply has run its course. Injuries haven't helped, his form definitely dipped, and perhaps a fresh start would suit everybody. But there's another side to the debate. This is still an experienced international footballer. He's played in the Premier League, played European competitions, played in the World Cup, and West Ham are now preparing for life in the Championship. If Alvarez is committed, and that's the key phrase, if he's fully committed to the challenge ahead, then there's absolutely a good argument to say that he could become a hugely important player at the club. The Championship isn't about technical quality. It's about winning battles, about controlling games, and about dealing with relentless physical football twice a week. These are areas where Alvarez, at his best, could excel. The question's never really been about his ability. It's more about, whether he genuinely wants to be here. Has he bought into Nuno's plans? Is he prepared to fight for West Ham's promotion? If the answer to those two questions is yes, then perhaps keeping Alvarez wouldn't be the disaster that some supporters might imagine. In fact, it might actually strengthen the squad considerably in midfield. Of course, if he wants to go, then that's a completely different conversation. You never want a player staying simply because no suitable offer has arrived. You want players who are going to be invested, who are going to be committed. So this definitely is one to keep an eye on over the coming weeks. And speaking of players rebuilding their futures, we've really got to talk about James Ward Prowse. And if I know a lot of people will be sighing and moaning and going, is that the best we can have? But I've got to be honest with you, he has been extremely impressive when it comes to this pre-season. His attitude and the way he's conducted himself has been superb. He looks like someone who's actually determined to prove a point. And after returning from his loan spell with Burnley, you would have thought, he not fell out with Nuno, but he certainly wasn't one of Nuno's favourites. And there were genuine doubts about whether Ward Prowse still had a future at West Ham. Some assumed he'd simply become another experienced player that will move on as part of the rebuild. Instead, he's gone quietly about reminding us exactly what he brings to a football team: experience, leadership, professionalism, quality in possession. We've seen him dictating the tempo in the pre-season games. We've seen him organising younger players around him, and we've seen him create opportunities and scoring a goal. And perhaps most importantly, we've seen him look like he actually wants to be part of this squad. And that shouldn't be underestimated. Some players returning from disappointing seasons, on loan, kind of mentally check out. Ward Prowse doesn't look like that way. It's going to be interesting because if Ward Prowse stays, there's a big question about Alvarez. If Alvarez has the same mentality, then it could be quite interesting what happens in our midfield. He looks motivated. He looks hungry. Does he automatically mean that he'll be the first name on the team sheet? Not necessarily. Competition should be, and absolutely rightly, should be fierce in this West Ham squad next season. But I do think he's playing himself firmly back into Nuno's thinking. Thinking about the Championship, Ward Prowse actually becomes an even more valuable player than he might have been in the Premier League. 46-game season, that could easily amount to an extra 10, 12 points by having someone like him in the squad. And his professionalism around younger players like Lewis Orford, his ability to keep possession under pressure, in his decent fitness record, all of a sudden suggests that maybe James Ward Prowse starts looking less likely a player that might be heading for the exit door. It's going to be quite interesting to see how that happens. But then the main story of today is all about Taty Castellanos. Now, there is a concern. Look, I've said we've spent much of the summer talking about players that we might have managed to keep, which has been great. Jared Bowen is staying, Thomas Soucek is staying, Mads Hermansen is staying. The understanding is that Dinos Mavropanos is very likely to commit as well. And those are significant wins for this football club. But because keeping quality players after relegation can be incredibly hard. Most clubs lose far more than they manage to retain. West Ham have done, so far, have done a very good job in resisting that pressure. But there may still be one significant battle left to do, and that is keeping Castellanos himself. Look, let's be really clear. There's been no interview, no discussions, nothing to suggest that the player himself is edging for a move. None of that. But everything that we're hearing now points elsewhere, and the concerns and the reports are centered around his representatives. It's understood that his agent is exploring potential opportunities elsewhere during this transfer window. Again, it's very different to saying that Castellanos wants to leave. We don't know what he wants to do. I dare say most footballers, if they're offered a chance to stay in the Premier League or a top European league around Europe, they're going to take that rather than the Championship. So, but it's not Castellanos apparently that's pushing for this. From the reports that come out today, it seems to suggest his agent is doing all the business. And agents do this all the time. They constantly assess the market. They're constantly speaking to other clubs, constantly looking for other opportunities, sometimes without any transfer ever happening. But equally, agents don't usually make those inquiries unless they believe that there could be interest in the player. And that's why this story kind of deserves a little bit of attention, because from West Ham's perspective, losing Castellanos now could create a huge problem. Fulkrug, we don't know what his future is going to be like. Pablo doesn't really score many goals, and that means we're going into this season, if Castellanos is sold, going to be scrapping for trying to get a striker in, or probably two strikers in, as soon as possible. And we know what it's like to find a decent striker. It's not easy. And finding one that's capable of leading a promotion challenge with only a few weeks left in the transfer window could be even harder. Look, we've sold Fernandes and we've sold Summerville. Callum Wilson has gone. And we are expecting one or two other players to leave. But the club is trying to resist any offers for any of our key players. So there's going to be a bit of a battle here, I think. If Castellanos' agent keeps pushing for a move, how's that going to affect the mood of the player himself? Look, we need a squad capable of hitting the ground running, and when the Championship season begins in the next few weeks. And Castellanos, at this moment in time, plays a massive part in that. He's expected to be the focal point, the player that we build an attacking system around. The goal scorer, West Ham hope, that will fire them straight back into the Premier League. If he leaves, suddenly another major recruitment task appears. Not only would West Ham need a striker, we would need a striker, as I've said, capable of being replacing our most important player up front at this moment in time. Look, the positive news is, like I've said, it doesn't appear to be any indication that Castellanos himself is pushing to move. And that really matters, because ultimately players still have a significant say in these situations. Just like the other players I've mentioned, if he's committed to West Ham, if he believes in the Nuno project, if he wants to lead the club back into the Premier League, then hopefully this becomes another story that quietly fades away over the next few weeks. But until the window closes, I'm sure we're going to continue to hear rumours. That's just the nature of modern football. Agents, as I've said, do all they can working behind the scenes. And if they got it in his ear, who knows how that might turn out. Look, West Ham have done exceptionally well so far to retain major players in this squad. Because if we can enter the new season with Bowen, Souček, Kamanson, Mavropanos, Ward Prowse discovering his form, Alvarez potentially staying, and Castellanos leading the line, then that's not a bad squad, to be quite honest with you. We do need to add to it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that's done and dusted. But you look at those professional players, those senior players, Bowen, Souček, Kamanson, Mavropanos, Ward Prowse, Alvarez, Castellanos. That's not a bad list of players. Look, the sales have generated the money. The finances look healthier. Now it's building a squad capable of winning promotion. And the next few weeks could ultimately determine whether this becomes a successful rebuilding project or another season of asking what might have been. Let's hope it's not the latter. As always, let me know your thoughts. Would you be happy to keep Alvarez? What about James Ward Prowse? What have you seen in him? I've seen enough in him to suggest he could really do a job in the championship this season. And how concerned are you about the potential of losing Castellanos? Let me know. Do become a subscriber. Like I said, click on that QR code. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the content. Hit the bell notification to let you know when I'm next on. And there's a hype button as well down there. If you click on that, it elevates this particular video for other people to watch on YouTube. Thanks for watching. I'll be back again very, very soon. Have a good rest of the day.